Hi, I am here to talk a little bit about how and why I got into history and what it means to me. This is for Professor Lenti's class, but I'm really excited to do this in general. So, this is a quote that I've always really liked. Unfortunately, I can't remember where I first heard it, but it's something I think it's really inspiring, and to me, it's one of the most important aspects of studying history. In my own opinion, I think the past will always be relevant to the present because there's always wisdom we can gain from it. I also think that learning history is an essential part of being a compassionate human being. Not only learning the story of other people, and I think it's impossible to hate somebody that you really seek to understand. Um, but anyways, not just learning from other people, but learning from our shared past and remembering that we all come from the same ancient ancestors who, learned to make tools and to harness fire. And I think that really makes someone feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, even bigger than their family, their community, even bigger than their country. It makes somebody feel human and just like every other human. That said, let me start getting into some of my own history of history exploration. I'll just be giving a brief overview of the slideshow, but I guess you can pause at any point to read the text if you want. Um, Essentially, I got really into family history at a very young age, and I've always found my own past really fascinating. Like I said, it kind of makes me feel like I'm a part of something greater. I am one of the main genealogists in my family, and I've spent countless hours looking through old records and paperwork trying to trace both my distant and recent ancestors. Some of my physical records from my Quebecois family are even in French, so I'm glad that's what I chose to learn in high school. So, I have always found history interesting, but the way I truly became passionate about the practice and not just the content is probably a little unconventional. These are Star Wars and a very old Minecraft server called Loka. In both cases, I was passionate about the context, yes, but I came to enjoy doing, quote unquote research about the related information. Like it says here, my family used to joke that I knew more Star Wars history than American history, and they were probably right. I used to be able to read and write the in-universe written language called Aurebesh, so I guess they had a point there. And then over here, Loka has a story, and it kind of began with people arriving to a strange world where they couldn't age or permanently die, which was giving an in-universe reason for the ability to, respawn. The story goes that it's an ancient object simply known as the artifact that keeps characters safe and yet also kind of, trapped on this world. A handful of times when the actual map needed to be reset, the story would go through world ending cataclysmic events, such as a villain destroying the world with machines used to harvest planets, or a disease known as the Blight sickening the whole world. In 12 years, there's been so much that I've witnessed and that I've taught people about, but there was also 2 years worth of story that I missed. And I was set in my determination to learn everything about everything that happened. I would interview older players, read and look for in game books, and watch YouTube videos. One time, I even convinced my mother to drive me to Canada so I could watch a Loka video that was not available in the US due to copyright restrictions. Yeah. And, we also got to get Tim Hortons, so thumbs up. Anyways, that's when I started very proudly calling myself a historian. A historian of a small Minecraft server, but still. I I would continue to have an interest in history, but I never did much with it other than genealogy projects until I joined the SCA. I dove into learning everything I could about my area, which was, of course, pre-Viking Age and also Viking Age, Scandinavia, which I'll talk a little bit about later. I learned content, but I also learned historical skills and picked up historical hobbies, and even kind of some of the beginnings of basic research methods. I loved my involvement in the SCA and being around other history enthusiasts so much that I decided to return to college after a 2-year break and to declare history as my major. And that is why I'm here now. So, back to Scandinavia. As it says here, it was Loka had a character named Freya. Yes, spelled that way. That would occasionally appear to guide and protect the Lokans, and so my love of Loka led me into learning about Norse mythology, and that very quickly became another passion for me. I was reading stuff about it all the time. It always remained an interest, but it was actually when some genealogical records showed that I was supposedly descended from the embodiment of wind, because, a lot of people claim to be descended from gods 1500 years ago, and they couldn't really prove otherwise. But yeah, having, that in an otherwise mostly British and French background, I thought that was super interesting. And so I became engrossed in Norse mythology again. But this time I was focusing more on where it blends with history, rather than the purely fantastical tales, which are still fun. And I'll talk a little bit more about my passions on this matter in a moment. For now, I'd like to focus on some of the other areas of interest that I had no idea I would become so passionate about. I enrolled in African American history and the history of Mexico classes because I needed credits in specific areas, and they seemed kind of interesting, or at least, more interesting than learning about the American Revolution again. But I cannot emphasize how engrossed I became in these histories, and especially learning how they still impact me and the rest of the US every day. I became super passionate about African American history, and especially around the New Deal and learning how systemic racism, such as redlining, this here is actually a map of redlining in Spokane. But how that system has created a culture in which it's so much harder for people of color to succeed, and learning what I can do to help break those systems down. A big part of that is education, and I have been educating just about everyone in my life about these issues. I also learned about some Greek and Roman history. I had a vague interest in it, so it wasn't terribly surprising. But it did have me learning things that I thought were so interesting. I started reading about them outside of school. What did surprise me, however, was how enthralled I'd become with the Mexican Revolution. Oh, am I enthralled with the Mexican Revolution? Prior to learning about it, I had actually assumed that that was the name of the war when they got independence from Spain, which I also thought was what Cinco de Mayo was about. No. It's just this epic tale about rebellion and idealism and sacrifice and friendships and betrayals, and I think most of all, just incredible courage, and all of that has me absolutely spellbound. It is such an inspiration, and I want to learn everything there is to know about it, and tell everyone what there is to know about it. My coworkers have even been begging me to talk about something other than the Mexican Revolution, and I indulge them for a little while, but then I make them listen to me talk about the Magonistas for 20 minutes straight. So I mentioned that I got into some historical hobbies, so I wanted to quickly share some of these. Here you can see one of my chainmail projects, and this is kind of a close-up. When I'm hoping, this is a shirt that I'm actually hoping that I'll be able to fight in eventually, because another one of my interests is fighting with rapiers. Over here I have a picture of myself in my toga, which I made shortly after the world history class, where I got really into Greco-Roman history. These shoes, which I affectionately call my Caligae, are not Caligae. but they reminded me of the style when I got them in Mexico, which I guess, way to blend my two historical interests, I guess. Finally, the last thing I have on here is more proof of my fascination with the Mexican Revolution. This is a snippet of a musical I think should exist, and does not. Making it exist would be pretty iffy, but if nothing else, I'm learning more about it as I do research for writing this. And if I can get even just a few friends or family members interested in the Mexican Revolution to, maybe want to learn a little bit about it, I would call that a success. I've been really loving hiding little references to it as much as I can, really, as I've been writing this. And if I have time at the end of this video, I'll sing a little part, I guess. So I want to go back to Scandinavia for a minute and talk about what I want to do as a historian. The things I want to add to the collection of historical knowledge, the trace I want to leave of myself. And what that is primarily the history surrounding the Scandinavian religion. As I mentioned here, that I am really fascinated by this theory that Odin may have not been the original primary deity, but rather the role was originally Thor's. One piece of evidence I've heard for this is the prominence of Mjolnir pendants all throughout Scandinavia, where, like I said here, there's not very many that reference Odin as directly. And another piece of interesting evidence is looking at the evolution of both language and religion. Norse mythology, Celtic mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, and even a lot of the Hindu gods stem from a common ancestor, which would be the religion of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. There are many cognates between them all. For example, the Greek Ares, the Roman Mars, the Celtic Lenus, and the Norse Tyr are all frequently associated with each other. But what I think is really interesting is that the Roman Jupiter, the Greek Zeus, and the Hindu Indra, who are all referred to as kings of their respective pantheons, are not likened to Odin, but rather to Thor. And sure enough, they are all gods associated with thunder. They're also all considered cognates to, or rather cultural descendants of, the Proto-Indo-European god, whose name I cannot pronounce, because it uses letters that I don't know how to pronounce. But he's considered the head god of his pantheon, and he's associated with thunder and weather, and he's even said to have wielded a hammer. I don't know how much more similar you can get. Meanwhile, the cognates for Odin are messier, and sometimes it's said to be the Greek Hermes or Uranus, the Roman Mercury or Jupiter, and he's also said to be similar to the Proto-Indo-European Deus, I think is how that's pronounced, who is considered to be like the Sky Father, but he's not the head god like Jupiter, Zeus, or Indra. And Odin seems to also be often associated with the myth of the Wild Hunt. So that brings me to my conclusion, why I do history. History is an integral part of who I am, and who all of us are. I don't think there's any field of study more important for everyone to know. Math and science and reading are all critical, but so is history. And it's by the very nature of being, history relates to literally everything else. Each field of study has its own history, because everything that exists has a history. It's also among the oldest, if not as a field of formal study, the oldest form of knowledge. Because before humans had writing, they told each other stories. There were oral traditions that would be passed down for generations. So I do history because I have questions, like I want to find the answers to, like who the original head of the pantheon was. And I want to provide that knowledge for people who have the same questions later. I do history because it teaches me lessons I cannot learn on my own. I do history because it connects me with everyone around me, and it tells you a story that you can't get just by looking at somebody. And most importantly, I do history because doing history is part of what it means to be human. So that's kind of my little short version of how I got into history and some of my interests in history, and how it's played a part in my life. So yeah, thank you very much. Bonus part. I did say that if I had time, I would sing my little thing here. So I suppose I will. Mexico 1910, let me set the scene. Explain why our anger was lit up like kerosene. Diaz runs the country in a tyrannical regime, treating Mexicanos like they're cogs in a machine, putting order and progress over land and liberty, letting hacenderos force peons into captivity. Those little references that I imagine or was talking about earlier was kind of I kind of had Madero do the intro, but here Zapata, one of his big things is that land and liberty part, so I had him do that part, and one of Villa's big things was getting rid of the abusive hacendaros, or hacenderos. So yeah, it's been fun to do. Anyways, for real this time, thank you very much.